Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. I hope everyone is doing alright. Let me check my volume. I gotta be honest, guys, this has been a very long day. If I'm looking kind of out of sorts, that's why. Give me one moment. And good. Yeah, so I'm doing labs because I gotta get labs done to send for my trip. Beyond doing labs, I had a medical procedure yesterday. It wasn't a big deal, but I was tired and kind of out of sorts today. And it just so happened, I think the medical procedure made something else worse, which is I love peanuts. I love all sorts of peanuts, like Brazilian hazelnuts. Hazelnuts react to my body pretty poorly. I have these things called adhesions that wrapped around my small intestines. They needed to go and cut it. They fused it back together. And fusing it back together, it created this, I think they call it anastomosis, that even though it works under normal circumstances, there's certain foods that it doesn't work well with. And nuts are one of those foods. When I eat hazelnuts, they get stuck. And so every time my body has this kind of parasitic action to try to push it out, it creates pain. So it's me double over, taking it like a man, but bitching nonetheless. No, I cried like a bitch. Like, oh God, it hurts. It hurts. Give it to the doctor. Yeah, one of those. So I try to stay away from them to some degree. My wife knows I love them. Everybody knows I love them. So they try to keep them away from me. And my self-control is somewhat minimum in those regards. I, however, had a hypothesis. My hypothesis was that insoluble fiber would work where soluble fiber wouldn't, and that hazelnuts are a lot more insoluble fiber or soluble fiber, which means those are the nuts that I can't necessarily eat, but I can get away with Brazilian and almonds. Not so much. My wife, last time this happened, I dealt with it for like a week. This time, I went like a day or two and said, all right, take me to the doctor. I was double over in the bathroom. I was like, all right, I need to go to the emergency room. All right, babe, let's go. Go to the emergency room. So I've been doped up with Dilaudid and Finnegan. The pain is to some degree gone. Well, but it's only gone because it's just being masked. So let's do some news while that pain is being masked. Might as well make it good use. Put it to good use. So Shaun King. Let's talk about Shaun King for the moment. Shaun King is you can call him a black activist of sorts. He's a journalist. He worked with TY. Journalist may be too strong, but he's a black activist. Commentator, cultural critic. I don't know how he would describe himself, but he's written for The Intercept. He's written for all sorts of news outlets, focusing on African American issues, especially dealing with around cops murdering African Americans, cops locking African Americans up, cops and the federal agencies abusing, federal and state and local agencies abusing their authority, especially within regards to this idea of locking more African Americans up than whites for the same crime. Especially from the standpoint of disregarding rights, whereas it seems you would more so disregard the rights of one while allowing the other to more so, let's say, fully accentuate their rights. Yes, not centralize. I don't think that's a word. Accentuate their rights. So I understand King's point in this. King is not necessarily wrong on this point. There are plenty of issues where that is absolutely true, which is why I think, on the balance, King is somewhat of a decent figure. That being said, King has been swept up in the Russian hysteria. And it being swept up in the Russian hysteria, he has pushed a certain narrative. Now, he wrote an article for The Intercept. The article is named, I put it at the bottom, "Did you feel betrayed by Trump's press conference with Putin? That's a taste of how black people feel every day." Now, even taking something to the degree of Helsinki, he turns it into some kind of racial issue. That's amazing. Yes, you can look at it through those lenses. I suppose you can look at it through any lens you want, but there's some lenses that are more accurate than others. He makes this case But the case is somewhat of a ridiculous case to make. Now, I understand what he means. He's just making a very basic point of the person who you put in the government, who's supposed to represent America, in Shaun King's eyes and in mainstream media's eyes, was not representing America. He was debasing himself before Vladimir Putin because there's some kind of collusion going on between the two, or because Vladimir Putin helped him win the election. This is the lens to which him and mainstream media has worked with. And let's be honest, this lens has been created and shaped almost entirely by the Democratic Party, where the media completely fed into it, and they howled at the height of their lungs. Oh my God, the President of the United States is debasing himself before Vladimir Putin. He's our enemy. We're at war. This is 9/11. This is Pearl Harbor. He's Neville Chamberlain. He's debasing himself. Now, King's point is, in the same way you feel that your political leader didn't stand up for your interests, that's the same way blacks feel every day. Seeing as we are also citizens, we are one person, one vote, and we, in many cases, get justice deferred or ignored entirely. I understand his point. I don't know if it applies here, but I understand his point. Glen Ford, there's certain things that Shaun King says in this and making this argument that are absurd. And in making this argument, to some degree, a warped personality, or not personality, but a warped perspective on this issue brought about by a certain level of derangement because of who's in that office. Two main points. One, this idea, well, let's go Glen Ford. Enter Glen Ford. So Glen Ford writes an article criticizing Shaun King's article. Because if Shaun King is all of a sudden all in with the FBI when they attacked Donald Trump, and if, in Shaun King's words, this is the lowest moment of a presidency, think about that, the lowest moment of a presidency in our modern time, that gives you some idea into what's in Shaun King's head and what Shaun King is thinking about in this particular moment. This is not a criticizing absolutely the man per se. This is more so criticizing the hysteria that the man has found himself warped into. Glen Ford, warrior. Shaun King is all in with the FBI and the CIA. And Glen Ford's points, I think, are right and straightforward. And again, this is not criticizing Shaun King as a totality of a person, just the perspective that Shaun King is taking in this very specific instance. Shaun King is an activist in a bubble, hobbled by a shrunken worldview that makes him an ally to the same forces of racial and economic repression he purports to oppose. I love that, because that explains almost the entirety of his perspective in making his case against Shaun King here. Yeah, I told you about the thing in the Intercept. I want to read just part of this so you get an understanding of where Glen Ford is coming from. But two main points. One, if the FBI, CIA, NSA, or for that matter, this kind of criminal proceedings, if this stuff takes place against Donald Trump, you must venerate the FBI. You must venerate these agencies, these godlike agencies with godlike knowledge and godlike understanding of the world. They're omnipotent. How dare you, sir? How dare you question the FBI's case here? How dare you question Special Prosecutor Mueller in the way he goes about his investigation? No, they haven't presented their case. But if you're talking about Trump or if you're talking about Vladimir Putin, fuck it, they're in it. They're guilty. And I'll agree with whatever you say. While simultaneously wagging your finger at these agencies for either jumping to justice from the standpoint of African Americans or Hispanics. Like, you're venerating them in one case while at the same token castigating them in the other. While at the same token not realizing that these are the same agencies. The same agencies that's doing one, that will lie and lie to Congress, that would kill some of the residents. Shaun King, even in his article, goes down this thing of the crimes of the FBI and the CIA. How do you reconcile that an agency that has done those things, has dropped cases, while simultaneously acting as if they're godlike from the standpoint of Trump, even though they haven't convicted Trump, nor will they even get to the point of likely presenting evidence because there's no way Russians are going to come back to the country. Mueller could have indicted the Muffin Man for all we cared if the Muffin Man was Russian. The Muffin Man was never going to be sent to the United States to say a word, which means that Mueller could indict whoever he wants. He doesn't have to show the actual details or the information itself to get across it took place. But in this case, Shaun King doesn't care about that. And second point, saying it's the lowest moment for presidency. This gives you a certain degree of delusion, which is why I agree with Ford. This point, even more so than the last point. We're supposed to believe that the FBI, CIA, cops, and all these guys are godlike. They're not. They're just human beings. They fuck up all the time. They themselves get into their heads certain political ideologies. And this is even before going to this idea of any level of their working in cahoots to trying to get Trump on. This is just from the standpoint of human beings in a system functioning a particular way with certain biases. Shaun King is right that they get it wrong often, that they're often handpicked or shady with the way they go about their evidence or go about their case. But in this case, we're supposed to believe that with Donald Trump, they're absolutely right. Evidence or facts or a legitimate, case be damned. The second part to this, indictment suffice for evidence. I guess that's my point. That's the point. The second point in this is the lowest moment for a president. Yeah, I said this gives you a certain degree of delusion. When George Bush was given a press conference and a shoe was thrown at him. Now, a shoe was thrown at him because George Bush had killed 1 million people in that man's country. And they're standing up there as if everybody is kumbaya when this guy has been a mass murderer. He invaded a country and killed 1 million people over the pretext of a lie, not to mention the torturing. When Obama got up there saying we're just going to move forward, we're not going to look back, which laid the groundwork with this idea of another Republican president can go in and do the exact same thing. For that matter, a Democratic president could go into office and potentially do the exact same thing of invading the country. You've just given it fair game, implicit, by not prosecuting the crimes of the previous administration. These guys were torturing, supposedly torturers against the law, but we're looking forward, we're not looking backwards. Obama used those war powers. Obama used that fig leaf of the authorization of military force and attacked 7 other Muslim nations. Glen Ford raises this idea of another press conference that took place where somebody was committing a genocide and that Obama was standing beside the person, I think he said Susan Rice, that was committing that genocide. Asking this question of how is a conference trying to meld 2 people who are for the most part superpowers in this world with the overwhelming majority of nuclear weapons between them, I think like 90-something%. How is it bad to get these countries talking in a way that tries to lessen hostilities? How's that bad in comparison to the other moments that I just mentioned? When they're having press conferences talking about things, and you're like, Jesus Christ, that's a lot of people killed. Or you've just said that we've tortured some folks and we're just moving forward. These are horrific press conferences. This doesn't even get in, and I'm just talking about my lifetime. This doesn't even get into LBJ lying about the bombings or Nixon lying about the bombings in Vietnam. Yeah. Let's go through a small piece that Glen Ford makes his point on. And I'm going to give you Shaun King's response to all of this. Damn, I'm behind the ball. Unfortunately, Shaun King didn't learn very much after all. When it comes to the powerful denizens of the FBI and the CIA or federal special prosecutors or corporate communications outlets like the New York Times, the Washington Post, MSNBC, CNN, King is a true believer. If the target is Trump or Putin, grand juries that routinely fail to indict killer cops, or when murderers are caught on video, become paragons of virtue in King's mind when manipulated to indict Russians. Intelligence agencies that tell galactic lies about non-existent Iraqi weapons of mass destruction, setting the stage for extermination of millions, on whom top spies brazenly and feloniously lie to Congress about spying on the entirety of the United States population, becomes vectors of truth when they offer quote-unquote assessments, but no proof whatsoever that Russians quote-unquote meddled in the U.S. electoral process. For Shaun King, Trump's willingness to stand in physical proximity to the leaders of the other superpowers while failing to signify trust in these same agencies marks the lowest moment of any presidential press conference in American history. Lower, apparently, in King's estimation, than George Bush's declaration to the press that his FEMA chief was doing a hell of a job aiding victims in Katrina, or President Bill Clinton's press conference announcing his intentions to abolish welfare as we know it. By the way, him doing that, the overwhelming majority of the people who were injured by that were children. I think it was like 70% of people who were kicked off were kids. Or introduces anti-crime bill that would send literally millions of African Americans to long-term prison. King activist awakening occurred in 1999, but it seems not to have shocked his moral sensibilities when President Obama named Wall Street operatives Tim Geithner and Larry Summers to top economic positions, even though the same of these financial interests had just taken the global economy and wiped the generation of black wealth. African Americans keep their wealth primarily in their homes. When those homes went belly up, their wealth also went belly up. The numbers are atrocious. It is abysmal. It is utterly abysmal. Obama leapt to save Wall Street while leaving homeowners to go bust. It's not that they had a plan. It's just they didn't care all that much about that plan, in which case they took their eye off that plan, allowing people to fall through the cracks. He's right. King, apparently, Donald Trump, standing beside Vladimir Putin is apparently worse than all of those things in King's mind. Let's jump down. In other words, the national security state is a greater damage to black people, persons per person, than anybody else in the country, not to mention its crimes against people of color around the world. But Shaun King believes every word of these agencies say about Trump and Putin, and he will denounce you if you challenge their veracity. King is making his stand with the FBI and the CIA. If King were a smarter fellow, I suggest he attend the Black is Back Coalition National Conference in St. Louis, August 11th to 12th, whose theme is, "There is no peace. Africa and Africans are at war. The United States to the world, comply or die." The conference recognizes the unrelenting war that is being made by the United States government against black people on the continent of Africa and throughout the United States in every aspect of our lives. Shaun King sometimes make noises indicating that he is aware of the war that's going on and that the intelligence agencies of the state, under presidents of both corporate parties, are main actors in the ongoing aggression. But at this juncture in history, King is all in with the FBI and the CIA, so he won't be welcome in St. Louis. Shaun King may be an activist, but he's not part of the black radical tradition of W.B. Du Bois, Malcolm X, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and Black Panther Party. Even Du Bois once toyed with accepting an offer of commission in the United States Army Intelligence during World War I, when it was massively spying and disrupting blacks and socialists. But Du Bois lived long enough to reject such collaboration and became a target of state. Maybe Shaun King's worldview will mature in the future, but right now the brother ain't ready. So, you can imagine, warrior, Glen Ford saying something like that, rub you a particular way. But what he's saying here is not necessarily wrong. And if you notice, this doesn't necessarily criticize Shaun King as a flawed man or anything. It's criticizing specifically Shaun King's perspective. Shaun King responds in somewhat of a debasing way. He debases himself. On the real, though, did you read that article? Do you know about that website and who was behind it? Sad man, you basically fell for fake Russian news. Fake news. Black Agenda Report is fake news. And not just fake news, it's Russian fake news. As if Glen Ford is some kind of Russian agent. He criticized Shaun King, saying Shaun King was delusional. And Shaun King responds in a delusional fashion. What Glen Ford said there wasn't wrong. The lowest possible moment. That in no way. Calling Glen Ford a Russian plant is the lowest possible way for you to respond to this. And I know I'm saying lowest because I'm pretty sure there are other lower ways. But this, from the standpoint of African Americans, is particularly gross. Let's say it gross. Let's not say lowest, but gross. The reason I say gross is, take a look at this. History may not repeat itself, but it damn sure rhymes. What would Martin Luther King say? I don't ask this question in this kind of capitalist, what would Jesus do, and get people stupid enough to buy bracelets saying, what would Jesus do? I don't mean it that way. I mean it, if Martin Luther King was here today, the guy who spoke out against the Vietnam War, that guy with his moral force, if morality is a thing, God damn it, he had it in spades. And he could wield it as a weapon to go against the people that he was going against. It is one thing to throw a punch. It is harder to stand there and take a punch, knowing that you're doing so for a higher reason. And Martin Luther King and those people will go out there and get hit and sick with dogs over and over again. What would King do? What I would hope, King would look at this and say, whether the Russians hacked or leaked or whatever is somewhat besides the point. We attack countries every day, all over the world, every day. We intrude into their elections. We even intruded into the French election, meaning hacking into their system during the French election. We do this constantly. It's a little weird and bizarre to make the argument as if we're standing there on a cliff in a dress, minding our own business, when a big bad wolf came up and fondled our goodies. It's more like we're the big bad wolf that's wearing all of this clothing and going around fondling other people's goodies. And the argument they're making is somebody fondles ours at this moment. I would hope that King would look at this and say, this is nonsense. Even if King believed what was being said, even if he said, I think you guys are right, that Russians did sell Facebook ads, Facebook and Twitter ads, and indeed had a choice on who they wanted to win the election, their nation state or their country. Of course, they're going to have a perspective on who they want to win the election. And whether they intervene or not is the second thing. Facebook and Twitter ads to me is nonsense. And as for the other point, having the what is the thing, that the indictments on the Russians, I would really hope the King would look at this in this way of saying this is nonsense. Even if you had some level where you could say, yes, the Russians somehow did something to the election. Even if you could do that, it didn't have an effect. Nobody said it had any effect or any impact on the election. No real person was part of it, even Rothstein. And even then, they never made a connection between a person, meaning any Americans, and the Russian effort. Meaning, Shaun King is looking at all of this through the lens of the Russian government. The American public doesn't care about this. And I would wager that King would also have in his perspective of, look, the problem here is not so much of countries intervening with one another. The problem here is that you have a large mass of people who are disaffected, who are pissed off, and Russia is being used as a cover. I have a hard time King will go along with this. Part of my other reason for disliking this argument is because Shaun King is picking up the argument of the intelligence services during the time King was doing this thing. They called King a communist. When they released the JFK files recently, look at what the FBI was saying about Martin Luther King. The file was released in a tranche of documents relating to the assassination of John F. Kennedy released on Friday. Mr. King is not referenced in the file. Mr. Kennedy is not referenced in the file, and it's not clear why it was kept secret for almost 50 years. There is no evidence that any of the claims in the report were verified, but this is what they were accusing King of. Dr. King was surrounded by advisors with strong link to the Communist Party. They were calling him a communist. Dr. King was subject to approval of alleged communist sympathizers. His organization, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, was set up as a tax dodge to raise funds for his activities. Dr. King took part in drunken sex orgies, coerced by women. Those intelligence services that King is venerating was saying all of this stuff behind the scenes about Dr. Martin Luther King, calling him a communist. They were calling him a communist in not just in private, but in the open. And beyond that, there was a concerted effort with this idea of blacks was going to somehow interact with communists and create a stronger bloc. This idea that African American leaders or people who are pushing a strong narrative of, like a Glen Ford narrative, is somehow communists or socialists, is deplorable. And it's the other perspective that the FBI was taking about African Americans during that particular time, especially African American leaders. This wasn't just King. They were creating these files on all sorts of African American leaders and civil rights leaders. Let's see, does this document have it? The list of alleged indiscretions will likely have been deeply problematic for the civil rights leader if it had been made public in 1968. The paper paints King in an extremely negative light despite his receipt of the Nobel Peace Prize and his contribution to the passing civil rights era of the last 4 years, because they didn't necessarily like his point of view. And like I said, in that document, they thought he was a communist at the time where the United States was supposedly fighting communists. I dislike this. It's one thing to disagree with Glen Ford's perspective and opinion and to push back on Glen Ford's perspective and opinion, but calling him a communist or calling him a Russian plant, not a communist, a Russian plant, doesn't address anything Glen Ford said. Doesn't address anything Glen Ford said at all. There was something else associated with this. Yeah, they used to call him, they tried to get King to kill himself. Yeah, I'm gonna leave it on this one. Elephants on Coke. Chipping in to help your healthcare costs. Oh, thank you, Elephants on Coke. I appreciate it. Talcum X is not black even. 0.01% black. Who's Talcum X? Rob, Illinois. What are you talking about? Shaun King. Call me Talcum X. Look, I don't dislike Shaun King per se. I just dislike this Russian nonsense. Honestly, what do you think? The same guy that came out and denounced the Vietnam War at a time when he was making inroads with the Democratic Party, and in that time where African Americans themselves was like, shut up about this Vietnam War stuff. What is this Negro doing talking about the Vietnam War? Why don't you mind your own business to the affairs of your state? He did it anyway, because he understood that there was a connection between the people who were here and there, and that the boot that America was using to kick Vietnamese was the same boot that America was using to kick blacks. And if you were being a real civil rights leader, the plight of people in that country couldn't be ignored. It couldn't be ignored. Glen Ford is making his point that if you're saying that this is the lowest moment, then this gives you some idea of how you rate other moments as being by definition lesser than this moment. Moments that had disastrous effects for the people of this country, especially people of color who you propose to support. I understand you hate Donald Trump. I understand you hate Donald Trump. But being deranged is not the way to go about it. I would imagine King would say, Donald Trump is a fucking maniac. By the same token, this idea of the Russia stuff is nonsense. And we need to focus on things dealing with poverty, civil rights. I strongly suspect he'd say that. So, I give this to Glen Ford. Shaun King calling him a Russian propagandist is pretty sad. And someone debasing of Shaun King himself and the stuff that he's trying to put forward. It's one thing if you just disagree with him and you explain your disagreement. It's one thing if you even just ignore it. Say, I don't need to dignify this with an answer. But calling the guy a Russian propagandist feels low. And to some degree, you're fulfilling the narrative that he said. A man in a bubble. An activist in a bubble. Shaun King, an activist in a bubble. Calling Glen Ford a Russian propagandist. Fulfilling Glen Ford's argument against Shaun King as being an activist in a bubble. So, I'm going to leave it here. I have a few more that I want to do tonight, so I'm delighted. It has me slightly, not slightly off kilter, but that's a few more I want to do tonight. Garnome. One or more of the groups King has worked with has complained about playing games with fundraising efforts and screwing people. Shan Rilha. I don't know. Shan Rilha. It doesn't matter how much they say it is pure bullshit about Russia. Yeah, it is. It's nonsense. Stop your anti-Semitism, you imbecile. Okay, I have no idea what you're talking about. You have weird Irish Jamal lifts on coke. Well, I wasn't feeling well today. I was feeling miserable today. And the stomach thing, I couldn't function. And so it was only after I got the pain meds that I started being able to, do stuff. Up to that point, I couldn't function. So I figured get my some in tonight and get some in starting in the morning, maybe a little bit later in the morning, and we go from there. I have more labs that I need to get done. I need like hepatitis A, B, C, MRSA, the works. So I'm going to be gone for a little section of the day tomorrow, but I'm probably going to start in the morning tomorrow also. But look, I love the song code. Thank you for your super chat. It helps. It all helps. All right. Jamal, you're going to have to keep us for the rest of the morning. Well, I do have a few shows that I'm going to do, so I'm going to. I don't have any belief about Russia and Trump. I'm waiting. Trudy, I guess I'm there with you on this. I guess my feeling is, doesn't matter. Like at the end of the day, you're talking about releasing factually true information that showed your candidate in a more real light. And it's showing a candidate in a more real light. They're trying to make the argument that the candidate lost. That's a gross argument to make. That's a really gross argument to have to make. That said, I got to be honest, I don't care about the Russians. They cheated Bernie Sanders. Fuck them about the Russia stuff. I don't care. I'm being very honest. But beyond not caring, they're selling a political narrative and they're trying to get people to buy into that particular political narrative because they don't want to deal with real issues. This is theater. This is utter theater. The media plays along with this theater. I learned that with the Helsinki visit. They howled like nobody's business. And a Republican president that usually just ignores media altogether comes back and reads a hostage note. That shows that media has influence. Media has power. They just don't use it. Or at the very least, they don't use it for good ends. They use it purely to make a buck, to put $1 in their pocket. So yeah. All right, I'm going to leave this here. I'll see you guys probably in about 10, 15 minutes. Thanks, guys. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. Of course, you can always support the Patreon. Today is August 1st. So for those of you who are still here, my wife came up with this awesome idea, Patron Appreciation Month. And all of the patrons will get put into a jar starting August 1st. And for this month, each week, we're going to do a drawing and give that person a t-shirt. Now, this is also going to take place for Super Chat, even though I'm not quite sure how I'm going to work that one out yet. We also want to do Super Chat. So, because we feel slightly unfair that the patrons get it, but the Super Chat doesn't, even though I know patrons are adding something else to the process because it's like a salary at that point. But there's certain people on Super Chat, like Balthazar, who's given a ton to support the show. So I feel off not doing that. Or even Wesley Walker, he gives a ton to support the show. I mean, I gotta be honest, in many respects, in some cases, you guys help keep this show afloat because of the way Google does their monies. Like Google demonetizes videos with pretty much anything in the title. I will get these things that says this video has been demonetized. You're like, you're demonetizing a video that's, about nothing. And then you get like, let's say like 1,000 in and they say, oh, our bad, the video's monetized. You're like, thanks. There was another video I did that I loved that video. I thought it was a fucking awesome video. And it got a copyright strike. And I challenged the copyright strike. And I won. But it's like, why are you giving me a copyright strike on this? When it was clearly on YouTube. It was clearly being used by all sorts of people. Why are you giving me a copyright strike? And then does the copyright strike inhibit the video? Because at that point they had taken the video down. All sorts of stuff. It's fucking aggravating. It's fucking aggravating. All right, I'm going to end this. I'll be right back. Jeremy Chase, gotta smoke a bud. Fucking A Jeremy Chase. I love it. Fuck it. Smoke your bud, my man. All right, be back shortly. Thanks, guys.